an amendment to Section 6 of Article 2 of the Constitution of Virginia and proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Virginia by adding an...
different from that under consideration will be admitted under color of amendment. And as I read the proposed floor amendment, it brings in a totally different subject, that being of criteria for redistricting, that I heard a number of members on this floor speak to was never in the original resolution. And so, Madam Speaker, my question would be under Rule 62A, given that this clearly interjects a new subject to a resolution that was not there previously, what would the chairman's ruling or the speaker's ruling be relative to its germaneness?
The chair will be at ease. Chair rules that it is germane. There is definitely criteria mentioned in both bills and discussed both in the introduced bill as well as the substitute. The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Madam Speaker, speaking to the floor substitute.
Delegate Simon, you have the floor.
Madam Speaker, members of the House, we gave you a little bit of a preview of this yesterday, but this is an opportunity for everyone in this body to vote on a truly independent, nonpartisan, citizen-led redistricting commission. Okay, and that's what many of us have said we wanted all along. Now, I've heard some of the critiques of the floor substitute overnight. We did give everybody a chance to sleep on it, a chance to read it, a chance to look at the key provisions. And I'm going to pull up here, maybe my able delegate from Farmer Keem can help me out here, man of many talents. So just to understand what some of the differences are, the substitute enshrines explicit protections for racial and language minorities in the Virginia Constitution, right? We don't just say 4 lines that says we'll do our best to comply with the VRA where practicable, right? We set up criteria for the commission to follow that talks about making sure that we have a commission, first of all, a commission that represents broadly Virginia, all aspects of Virginians, whether it's racial, geographic, all sorts of diversity, but also says that it's going to be a key tenet of whatever maps they draw, that language and racial minorities are protected. It removes legislators from being directly involved in the map-making process, right? People say they want an independent, they say we want voters picking their politicians, not the other way around. Right? The substitute, that's what you get. With the underlying resolution, you get legislators. You get half the members being legislators from the Senate and from the House, and there's no guarantee of other than political party, that you'll have any diversity of thought or of background or of geography in those picks. It enshrines transparency and public input in the Constitution. The commission is required to hold public hearings throughout the state in the substitute, right? We looked at the timing of the underlying piece of legislation, and they've got 45 days to complete a map when they get data in February when we're here in session, and it's 8 legislators here in session. They're supposed to get the public input. It provides criteria in the Constitution explicitly protecting racial and language minorities and preserving communities of interest. Now, you've got the same language in enabling legislation. We've got that criteria in House Bill 768 that Delegate Van Volkenburg put in. We have it as a standalone in case nothing passes in the bill that you all voted against earlier this morning, this actual morning, after I reminded you exactly, Madam Speaker, of what was in that bill, all these things that this says no on, say no on. So by the way, if you voted no to those criteria before, safe to say you're probably going to be in this column. But if you voted yes to those criteria before, I hope that you'll be in this column. Madam Speaker, it prevents political gerrymandering in the Virginia Constitution, right? That's what everybody tells us when they say support redistricting reform. They want to end political gerrymandering, right? The assumption in the underlying bill is that, well, if you have an equal number of Democrats and Republicans, and if they can veto each other, they won't politically gerrymander because it'd be mutually assured destruction. So kind of hope that the dynamics work out that way, but it doesn't say you can't do it. It doesn't say you can't do it in the Constitution. It says that in the criteria bill, which you all voted against, and which we all voted for. Madam Speaker, it requires a supermajority for the commission to adopt the map, because I've heard this argument before. Well, we don't know who's going to pick the commissioners. It's going to be in a process that the Secretary of the Commonwealth will oversee. By the way, I want to be very clear about something. The Secretary of the Commonwealth doesn't pick the members. She oversees the process that will be adopted in, get this, enabling legislation, right? Because we do need to get enabling legislation to set up that process. But the process, although there's enabling legislation, the constitutional amendment requires it to be a transparent process, requires there to be applications, requires there to provide an opportunity for everyone across the Commonwealth to participate. And it requires political diversity. And so I've got some people hung up on what does that mean? In the current system, you've got Republicans and Democrats. I knock on a lot of doors when I run for office, believe it or not. And I run into a lot of people that tell me they're independents. I run into a lot of people that tell me they vote this way sometimes, they vote this way sometimes. So the substitute provides an opportunity for people that are independent, that aren't hyper-partisans, to participate in the process. And it also requires political diversity across the Commonwealth, because I'll tell you, among Democrats, we're quite a spectrum. You've got somebody like Senator Saslaw, and you've got somebody like Delegate Carter. We've got diversity, and those different points of view can be represented in a commission that follows these criteria. When you're just picking 4 from each body, and they're picked by the leadership of the body, you know you're going to get just the most partisan folks involved in that. And so if you want a nonpartisan commission, this doesn't give you the way to do it. This doesn't give you the way to do it. Almost done here. The commission has authority to adopt a map that doesn't require General Assembly approval. That's what the whole point of this is supposed to be, right? To get the General Assembly out of the process. The reason ultimately we're going to need a constitutional amendment to do this is because the Constitution says the General Assembly has to make these districts. We're trying to make it so that doesn't happen anymore because people tell us, people that are proponents of redistricting reform say they want a process that doesn't involve politicians picking their voters. Yes, we both go ahead and send the adopted map to the General Assembly for approval, but we don't draw the map. And then we have this question about what happens if we fail to adopt the map. We have actually, and you've heard from Delegate Levine, you've heard from Delegate Price, you've heard from Delegate Watts, the current amendment that's unfixed, as it were, sort of says that any two members of the commission, the two legislative members, can just conspire together to send it straight to the Supreme Court. Ours says if you can't get 9 out of 11 members to agree, so talk about a supermajority, we get 9 out of 11, a consensus map, then we'll give the General Assembly the two maps that got the next highest number of votes to pick from. Keeping in mind, this is not going to be a monolithic commission. This has got 11 members, and they must, constitutionally must, not just enabling legislation, which can be repealed, they must represent a broad swath of Virginia. Thank you guys very much for the help with the poster. Madam Speaker, members of the House, I know we've been told we have no choice but to adopt this amendment. And I'm here to tell you today that there is another choice. There is another vote that you can take today. You can take a vote that tells your voters at home, that tells the people you campaign to, that tells the people that are sending you emails and postcards and making phone calls to your office that you care about and you want and you desire for this Commonwealth a true anti-gerrymandering amendment. You want redistricting reform that really does take politicians out of the mix. You are for a constitutional amendment that sets up a process where every Virginian has a voice and a seat at that table. And that's what we're asking for, Madam Speaker. We're asking for you members to understand, to hear the voices that say they've been marginalized and they say they need a place. Now, I've heard that your commission, Delegate Simon, your commission with 11 members, there's no guarantee that you'll have an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. To that I say, under the underlying amendment, communities of color, communities of interest, minority, disadvantaged communities, they have no guarantee of being enshrined on that either. There's nothing that protects. Now we say, well, we'll have enabling legislation that will fix that piece of it. So what I've heard is we can't trust the enabling legislation under my floor substitute to protect political minorities, but actual minorities need to rely on the enabling legislation that we will draft to know that they will have a seat at the table. That's unacceptable, Madam Speaker. This amendment is deeply flawed. I know that most of us know that it's not perfect. In fact, no one has told me it's perfect. Even the most ardent advocates have said it's not perfect, but nothing's perfect. It's going into our Constitution. And this has been a long and difficult process, and it's going to be just as long and more difficult to try and change it. We have an opportunity to vote for something better, Madam Speaker. I implore you all, please, vote yes on this floor substitute. Let's restart this process. Let's send a signal to the governor that we want a truly independent, nonpartisan, citizen-led commission that will give us fair maps that will represent the needs of all Virginians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Delegate from Clark County, Delegate Goditis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just wanted to point out a little document called the U.S. Constitution, wherein there was not enshrined specificities about race and gender, and 230 years later, it's still giving us headaches. Madam Speaker, that's all I wanted to say.
The delegate from Albemarle, Delegate Bell.
Madam Speaker, I would ask to speak to the motion to pass substitute.
Delegate Bell, you have the floor.
All right, so we've just heard about a constitutional amendment, and the gentleman from Fairfax said he's asking for an amendment, but he left out the most important thing, by far the most salient aspect of his amendment, which is that it will not affect 2021 redistricting. That's what it's for. That's the purpose. It might have some wonderful parameters, it may not, but the key is that will not affect 2021 redistricting. If we accept the substitute, There will be no voter referenda this fall. Not going to happen. There will be no new constitutional rules on how this body redistricts in 2021. I mean, to be clear, if you want to pass a constitutional amendment, the body passes it, as we did last year for the one in front of us that had 86 votes. You then have to have an intervening election. The new General Assembly has to pass it, as we say, word for word, comma for comma. You then have to have the voters approve it. So if you accept the substitute, we don't have an election this fall that would change the body, so it would pass over to 2021. We would then have the General Assembly election in the fall of 2021 after the redistricting with the new map, because we have to do that next summer. We would then have that General Assembly, I suppose, pass it again, and then in 2022, it would then be sent to the voters for their approval, and if they liked it, then in 2023, long after we were safely past the redistricting of 2021, there might be some new constitutional rules. Yeah, I was going to say, which would, I guess, ultimately approve in 2030. So if you wish to have constitutional guardrails on this, if you want to have something that we, the General Assembly, can't undo in the redistricting next year, this is the proposal you have before it. 86 people voted for it. If you change it now, what you're doing is killing the constitutional referendum and amendment for next year. Thank you.
The delegate from Newport News, Delegate Price.
Speaking to the motion.
Delegate
Madam
Price,
Speaker.
you have the floor.
Madam Speaker, listening to the delegate talk about 2021, and from what I remember, because it was less than 12 hours ago, is that this body actually passed a criteria bill that will be legislatively tying our hands as to what anyone could do in drawing a map in 2021. And so while I can appreciate the gentleman's fear that the new majority party might do to them what they did to us for 20 years, but this year, we actually did pass the criteria bill that had been proposed in 2017, killed by Republicans, proposed in 2018, killed by Republicans, proposed in 2019, and not given a hearing. But we did that, Madam Speaker. We passed that. It's on the way to the governor. It will guide the 2021 process. And so I appreciate the sentiment, but I would like to set that record straight.
The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Levine.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Delegate Levine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When it comes to the process of the amendment, we know what people, and at this point, virtually all 100 of us now say they want. Independent, nonpartisan redistricting with strong criteria to prevent gerrymandering. And that is in Delegate Price's bill. That is something we can do. That is something we can do this year. That is something we can do next year. We've talked about the fact that the constitutional amendment has no protections against gerrymandering. Even its sponsor admits that the Supreme Court can gerrymander us to oblivion with no appeal. It makes the Supreme Court the equivalent of the governor, the legislature, and everyone all combined. So the question comes down to a very simple question. It's really very easy. It's a question of who do you trust? Right? Who do you trust? Do we Democrats trust the delegate from Shenandoah and the delegate from Spotsylvania to be fair-minded with regard to gerrymandering? Or do we trust our colleagues to get this right? All of us are committed to nonpartisan, independent redistricting. Who do you trust? When I have a really tough decision, I try to look to see who I trust. And I hope that we trust each other enough to pass this substitute. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Rome.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking to the motion.
Delegate Rome, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'm a reporter. That was my 10 and a half years that I spent before I got elected. And in 2017, when I launched my first campaign, I said I supported independent redistricting, and that legislators, us, should not be picking our constituents. It must be the other way around. And on December 4th, 2017, I put out a statement saying, yes, I'll be supporting bills from legislators favoring independent, nonpartisan redistricting with lines drawn by neutral, disinterested, third-party observers whose job is designing districts that are compact, contiguous, and in compliance with federal law instead of party advantage. This substitute, we know where it's at. We know the posture that it is in right now. Every member of this body is well aware of what happens on a second read of an amendment when we are dealing with a substitute. We all get that. At the same time, this body can also, by passing the substitute today, send a message to the governor about this is what we would like to see, and that we can have that done in a special session this year. We had a special session that was called for 2018. Some of us who are here remember that as well. And in 2018, I doubled down on what I had said before in regards to nonpartisan redistricting. I said, I'm a solid vote for independent redistricting, September 24th, 2018. At the same time, independent redistricting commissions need to reflect the diversity of the Commonwealth. At least half women, at least half people of color, and no politicians, past or present. If you take issue with more than half of a commission being women and being people of color, cis, straight, white men had a supermajority in the House of Delegates for 399 years until 2018, and still have a majority to this day. We need to make a real effort to support diversity and inclusivity. I've been saying this since I ran for office. I've been saying this since I've been in office. And I will tell you this. Let's just say the whole thing today goes down. If something just out of nowhere happens, we didn't pass a floor substitute, constitutional amendment was rejected, I would be willing to look into the camera right now as I'm looking as is and tell my constituents back home that under no circumstance would I ever vote to pick my constituents before they pick me. I, as a legislator, should not have a role in picking my constituents. That should be an outside group. Why? Because we have inherent bias. We have inherent conflict of interest. I've been saying this since I was a reporter, let alone since I was a candidate and since I was a legislator. And what I see before us is the closest step that I've had in the 3 sessions that I've been down here to actually vote my values on independent, nonpartisan redistricting. That's why I will be voting for that floor substitute today, to keep my campaign promises and to be consistent with what I have said throughout the last 3 years. And I would urge the body to do the same. Thank you.
The delegate from Chesapeake, Delegate Lefwich.
Madam Speaker, speaking to the substitute.
Delegate Lefwich, you have the floor.
So I kind of take a little different tact on this. We could quibble about the merits all day long, all evening. But let's be clear, this substitute eliminates the voter's ability to vote on this in November. And I don't know about you, and I know some of our colleagues on this side may not have done the same thing, but in 2014, I wanted but was denied the opportunity to vote on redistricting. In 2015, I wanted but was denied the opportunity to vote on redistricting. In 2016, I wanted but was denied the opportunity to vote on redistricting. In 2017, I wanted but was denied the right to vote on redistricting. In 2018, I wanted but was denied the right to vote on redistricting. In 2019, I got my opportunity and I took it. And I voted yes for the amendment, the underlying amendment. I finally had my chance, and 85 other people in this body voted with me. When I returned to my district, I was chastised by my supporters. Jay, we raised money for you. We knocked doors for you. We put up signs. We did all these things for you. How could you just turn that power over to someone else? And these are not my constituents. These are my supporters. Let's be clear about that. And I looked my supporters in the eye and I said, it's the right thing to do. And I'm going to do the right thing again this year. They said, how could you turn this power over to someone else? You're in the majority. Why do you think that would be afforded the same right to you? I said, yes. because 85 other people made a promise, and I believe they'll keep it. Madam Speaker, SJ 18 is a culmination of decades of advocacy, and within a short span of 60 days, we're going to eliminate that and deny the voters the right to choose how they want to elect their representatives. We're on the doorstep of success, of real reform, and Virginians have the right to exercise that opportunity in November. Please do not jerk the prize away from them. Let's be clear, the substitute kills, eliminates, voids, guts, I don't care what term you use, and delays for at least 10 years the right of the voters to vote on this. Please do not deny my 80,000 constituents and the millions of people across Virginia the right to do this. Madam Speaker, members of the body, everybody's had a leader that they've looked up to, they admire. What makes them great and sets them apart is their ability to rise above the pressure and lead. I ask you to do the same thing. This is a time where we close our eyes, we shut out the chatter, all the noise, and we ask ourselves, what is the right thing to do? Madam Speaker, I trust the voters. Thank you.
The delegate from Enrico, Delegate Willett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking to the substitute.
Delegate Willett.
Thank you. We all answer to many constituents, and I'm sure many of us have been hearing from many constituents, particularly in the last few days, text, email, phone calls, and I completely respect the deference to those constituents. Those constituents are supporters, as voters, financial supporters, canvassers, and I've heard from many of them. But at the end of the day, the most important constituent to me is my family. That's who I ultimately answer to. And as we've sat here today, for most of the day, this longest day of ever in our lives, a member of my family has been here. My daughter is actually sitting on the floor today. She's about 6 feet behind Chairman Sickles. And ultimately, I want to be able to answer to her. I want to be able to look her in the eye and tell her that I did the right thing. Madam Speaker, we can do better. We can do better, and we can pass the substitute. Thank you.
The delegate from Manassas, Delegate Carter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking to the substitute.
Delegate Carter, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's been a pretty common theme in a number of the things that we've taken up in this legislative session. And that common theme is an urgency on the part of Democrats to do something on an issue that has long been denied. I spoke yesterday on the Virginia Clean Economy Act, on how I felt that Dominion Energy was taking advantage of our desire to do something to make us do the wrong thing. I voted on a number of gun bills, some in favor, some opposed, because I felt that in our urgency to do something, in some cases we were doing the wrong thing. Madam Speaker, I voted last year for the amendment because I had very little time to consider it. It was put together at the last second, the final week of the session, as we stand here now, and it was held in front of me as a way of saying, do something on this issue. Now, in the time that I've been here, the 3 years, but especially this year, I've learned quite a lot of things about some members on the other side of the aisle. I've gained tremendous respect for the delegate from Chesapeake, Delegate Leftwich. He and I worked together on the insulin bill. I've gained an understanding that the delegate from Albemarle is very, very careful with his words. And so, Madam Speaker, I would invite the members of this body to think about the delegate from Albemarle's words when he spoke a moment ago, because he was very, very careful with them. He said this is something that the General Assembly cannot undo. I believe that he chose those words very carefully, that he said precisely what he meant to say, and that is precisely why the Republicans are holding this before us as a way of saying, do something, Democrats. Do something. Go ahead. Do something that the General Assembly can't undo. Madam Speaker, we've had bills that will end partisan gerrymandering. We've had bills that will end racial gerrymandering. But if we pass an unamended resolution today, it will go to the voters, I believe it will pass, and it will be something that the General Assembly cannot undo. And what that something is putting in place a commission with legislators, picking the people. And when I campaigned, I said that the people should pick the legislators, not the other way around. We will have 8 legislators picking the people. And if those 8 legislators cannot agree, if 2 of them refuse to go along with it, then it goes to the Supreme Court, who shall establish the districts. And what happens when the Supreme Court looks at the legislation that we passed? They'll say, oh, General Assembly, that's cute. But the Supreme Court shall establish the districts, regardless of the criteria, regardless of what we try to do. Because, as the delegate from Albemarle said, this is something that the General Assembly cannot undo. So if we're going to do something that we cannot undo, Madam Speaker, we'd better do it right. And I believe that this substitute gives us an opportunity to do it right, rather than just doing something that we cannot undo. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Will the delegate from Manassas yield for a question?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I will yield.
Delegate yields.
Madam Speaker, I wanted to make sure I heard the gentleman right. Again, must be something wrong with my hearing, but when he said that this amendment that he voted for last year was just placed down in front of him at the last minute, is he suggesting that he was talking about last year when he voted for it, when it was pre-filed, when it was debated in committee, when it came to the floor in a timely fashion, that he was talking about last year and not this thing that just got dropped in front of us 2 days ago?
Madam Speaker.
I just want to make sure that that's what the gentleman's saying.
Madam Speaker.
Delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. I know sometimes we recitate facts on this floor, but I am concerned about the line of questioning because, as I recall, there were amendments and there was a lot of discussion back and forth. So, Madam Speaker, I just ask that the minority leader, if he's going to give a recitation of facts about what happened last year, that he be as accurate as possible.
Delegate from Manassas, Delegate Carter. Would you like
Thank
to
you,
respond?
Madam Speaker. I would say to the delegate from Shenandoah that I believe this language came to us as a Senate amendment and then a conference report. This is not the language that was introduced last year.
Madam Speaker, will the delegate yield for a further question?
No, Madam Speaker, I do not.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Actually, there's a queue here, Delegate. The next in line, Delegate from Fairfax County, Delegate Corey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Like many of you, when I ran for re-election, I pledged and I signed documents that said I would vote for this constitutional amendment. But what I know is that this substitute is actually what many people think the constitutional amendment intends to do. My voters are not stupid, my constituents are not stupid, and I don't think anybody here has very many stupid voters or constituents. I am already getting messages from my constituents asking me to support the substitute, telling me that they think that it is the right thing to do. And I know it's the right thing to do, and I know all of you can explain it to your highly intelligent voters and constituents, and they will understand. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The delegate from Portsmouth, Delegate Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking to the substitute.
Delegate Scott, you have the floor.
I'm new this year, so they can't point it out that I voted for this last year because I'm new. That's one. Two, constitutional amendments are supposed to be difficult. You're supposed to take a year, you look at it, you view it, you vote on it, then you come back the next year with a different General Assembly, possibly, as this one is, 18 new freshmen. You take another fresh look at it. If it doesn't pass muster, you don't vote on it. That is your responsibility. Forgive me if I'm not impressed by the numbers that 82, 70 passed last time. In the 2005 session, the constitutional amendment, marriage may exist only between a man and a woman, that is enshrined in our Constitution. Guess how many folks voted for that? 79. 79 people were wrong then. I would submit to you that 82 people were wrong last year. I'm telling you guys, and I'm telling the members, Article 1 Bill of Rights, Section 15-A, marriage, in our Constitution. We can fix legislation. That is still in your Constitution right now, that only a union between one man and one woman may be a marriage valid in or recognized by this Commonwealth. That's what you put in the Constitution. Don't make that mistake again. It's still there. And some of you who voted for it are still here. And I want to make sure that we're clear what we're doing. We have a responsibility to go back and review the work that the past General Assembly did. And we can say, we don't have to, y'all gave them an A last year, I'm giving them an F this year. We can go back and fix this. It's wrong. What does it do? The Constitutional Amendment, what does it do? It has some general language in there that says that we will try our best to protect racial minorities. It doesn't enshrine Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. It doesn't enshrine it. It says we'll refer to whatever the current federal law is. But we already know who's in office right now, and we know how he picks judges. And those judges will be the people that are interpreting the law. There's a reason that when Delegate Sickles brought back an amendment to try to cancel this Bill of Rights, this Section 15A marriage, and it failed, it never made it to the floor. Because some folks are in hopes that if we get the court pact right, this may come back and be very valid. Otherwise, you would have removed this from the Constitution. Now, I will tell you, right now, if we put this in there, we are depending on folks outside of Virginia, outside of the General Assembly to pick this, to do the criteria and do the redistricting. Moreover, I ran on independent redistricting. I already got to be nice to the Speaker. I got to be nice to Madam Senate Pro Tem. I got to be nice to the Chair of Appropriations. I got to be nice to the Majority Leader. Now I got y'all telling me I got 8 more folk I got to not offend. Because they'll draw me out of my district. We have 8 new people. Moreover, the Speaker, the Minority Leader, Senate Pro Tem, Minority and Senate, they get to pick the folks. And as I read the amendment, now I read well. I may look slow, but I can read. It doesn't even prohibit her from picking herself. What kind of constitutional amendment would you put something in? Like, why would you put some language in that gives the politicians more opportunities to abuse? Not you, Madam Speaker. But somebody behind her, the next person that may come. Moreover, the first day we were here, freshmen, 18 of y'all, first day we were here, we were sitting here twiddling our thumbs like, what the heck are they doing? They passed a resolution and they went over to the Senate, and the Senate said, we insist, and then y'all went back and said, we insist. And what happened was I found out, well, the House of Delegates had said, well, we want 3 people to go or 4 people to go, and the Senate said, well, we want 4 too. And we said, no, you're not getting 4 because this proportionality thing, it's more of us and less of y'all, and we insist on it, and we don't want to set a precedent. So it's 4 of us and 2 of y'all. And after we insisted, they finally said, okay, we're going to do it, but then they did what they wanted to do anyway. Then a couple of days ago, delegate from Caroline, Delegate Orrick, taught me another lesson. Delegate Adams had introduced a bill, and that bill had established a committee or a commission. And the Senate had put in a substitute and said, we want equality. We want 4 and 4 in that committee. And Delegate Orrick, to his credit, he taught me something, thank you. He got up and said, hold on. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's making a mistake. We cannot have equality. She doesn't know. So I'm going to ask her to reconsider that and reject the Senate amendment. And then, oh my God, it was an emergency. We had to go at ease to figure this thing out. We went at ease and we had a big powwow and we did what we normally do. And then we came back down, and Delegate Adams, after being scolded, came back and said, I've learned to err in my ways. I'm going to ask the body to reject it because it doesn't matter. It doesn't go and coincide with our proportionality. And as Delegate Orrick so aptly pointed out, we did not want to set a precedent by giving them equality in that way. Am I right, Delegate Orrick? I know I am. Because I listen well. So then, I'm looking at this amendment, and lo and behold, how many senators does it have in it? Y'all know the answer, 4. And then I checked and I said, well, how many members of the House of Delegates are there in there? Hold on, Delegate Orrick, something is wrong, because you said, the delegate from Caroline said there is no way we're going to give them the same number that we had. But lo and behold, not only are we setting a precedent, not in a bill, not in a legislative item, but we're setting a precedent right here in the doggone Constitution. That makes no sense. When you put more politicians involved, you're going to get more politics. What we need is an independent, bipartisan commission made up of citizens that has been suggested by the delegate from, where are you from, Fairfax? I got so many cities up there in Northern Virginia. But the delegate from Fairfax. This meets the criteria. Y'all already put one thing we can't get out of the Constitution, that only a union between one man and one woman may be a marriage. Now, my people, we know that there are, 20-some-odd members of the Black Caucus now? And every time we move forward, it's always somebody trying to move us back a step. Obama gets elected, they say, no, we're going to stop everything. We realize that the vast majority of the Black Caucus here now, we are against this. Not because of me. I'm going to be fine, y'all. I do well. Check my card, check my bank account, check my statement of economic interest. We do well. This is not a job for me. This is a calling to protect those who are like me, who would have no voice. So we need to make sure that we protect racial minorities. This constitutional amendment does not do it. That substitute does. If you're riding with us, vote for the substitute. Thank you.
The delegate from Virginia Beach, Delegate Miyares.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking to the motion.
Delegate Miyares, you have the floor.
I just wanted to point out a couple things that I think the chamber should, understand as we process this one. I think everybody should realize that the same Fourth Circuit that overturned the previous maps will have the potential to overturn any map that's drawn by anybody, no matter what happens with this substitute or anyone else. I do feel like everybody in this chamber that ran this past year and has run in subsequent years for ending gerrymandering, it's easy when you get in front of civic leagues and whatever to say, that's the easy part to say, I don't want politicians picking their legislators. Nobody here ran when they got in front of a civic league or knocking on door to door, said, vote for me, I'll end gerrymandering in 2030. Nobody did. I think there's 30 plus of us that were not even in this chamber in 2011 when that last map got passed. And in 2017, when my party had a 65 seat plus majority, and I was on privilege as an election, as it was alluded to, and I voted twice for redistricting reform. I remember getting called into a leadership individual's office, and I remember getting read the Riot Act. And I remember Madam Speaker saying, there's only one person on this planet who has the ability or has the right to speak to me like that, and that's my mother. And you're not her. I often think, Madam Speaker, when we sit, all of us sit in this chair, and then one day someone else will sit in your chair. And I oftentimes like to come here to the Capitol at night and see the photos on the bottom level. And I look through, and so many of them are faceless names. We don't know who they are. They had dreams, hopes, aspirations, and they came to this body, hopefully, to leave a mark. And the reality is, for the vast, vast majority of all of us in 25 or 30 years, no one else will know that probably you ever sat in this seat. And I think in some ways that's a healthy thing. I remember when I was running for the House of Delegates, I had 2 previous opportunities and had said no, because at the end of the day, being a dad is a heck of a lot more important than being a delegate. And I remember having a conversation with someone that I respect enormously. And they said, why in the world would you ever want to get involved in politics? Politicians just say what people want to hear. They say what they need to get elected. They break promises. It is a broken system. The hyper-partisanship, the yelling, it is such a broken system. And I remember having the conversation with precisely for the reasons you cited. Because it's broken. All of us in this room got in for similar reasons. I have such respect for people on both sides of the aisle. I know how hard all of us work to try to do the right thing. We come with so many different philosophies, and people have these very different experiences in their life than mine. But ultimately, every person in this seat got in because they felt like the system's broken. And what I would say is, voting for the substitute means the system that's broken continues for another decade. And so I would just ask, give the voters a voice, and let's try to fix a broken system. Thank you.
The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Herring.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Delegate Herring, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I appreciate everyone's view, but Delegate Mayari has made a statement which I think is important and what's broken. When I looked at the board that Delegate Simon put up, SJ 18, a lot stood out to me, but 4 things important to me. Explicit protections for minorities. SJ 18 doesn't have it in there, but the amendment does. Removes legislators from being directly involved in the mapping process. SJ 18 doesn't have it in there, but the amendment does. Enshrines diversity in the commission. SJ 18 doesn't have it in there, but the amendment does. And prevents political gerrymandering. SJ 18 doesn't have it in there, but the amendment does. Madam Speaker, I think what's most important for me to note is that SJ 18, to me, is broken. And what's most important on that board to me is not only the diversity that is promised, but the fact that we would remove legislators from being directly involved in the mapping process. And yes, I know I voted for the amendment last year. And why I stood up so quickly when Delegate Carter was criticized is because he is correct. Something was filed and it went through a process. And I remember, I think I recall correctly, and I could be wrong, but I believe it was 2 days before we adjourned. It was late at night, and we got a senator walking into our caucus to give us a briefing on what the deal that they struck. And I remember saying, gosh darn it, no, because it's not nonpartisan redistricting. But you know what? Unfortunately, I went with the wave. Well, let's do it. It's something. I see nothing wrong with reaching for perfection. It is difficult, and I would say is a profile in courage to realize that you would have the opportunity to vote for something that removes each and every one of our hands from the mapping process. That's huge. That is huge. I dare say not many states do that. So, Madam Speaker, I stood because I know that this is very impactful for the future of Virginia. And I'm standing because we have the opportunity to do something good for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And while other groups may not be talking about removing legislators from the mapping process, of course they're not talking about that. They have a vested interest in making sure that this passes. They have donors out there. Well, I know I have my constituents sitting in my district. And when I can go home and say that I removed legislators from drawing that map, I think that's important. And I support the amendment, and I hope everyone else will too.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Madam Speaker, members of the House, just want to sort of quickly sum things up a little bit. I think we heard from, it's very interesting actually, very insightful debate, Madam Speaker, to hear from some of the members on the other side who for years, apparently, and years, really wanted to vote on redistricting reform. And I think that tells you a little bit of something, and I think it helps answer Delegate Levine's question about who you trust here. Madam Speaker, members of the House, there is a path of much less resistance for those of us that think that this resolution was a bad idea. We could have continued to do things the Virginia way. We are giving everyone on this floor an opportunity to vote for something today. What we're asking you to do, is to vote for something that is what your constituents tell you they want, what Virginians want, is the opportunity to vote for something that's right. Now, I understand the effect of what this vote is. Right? We're not trying to deceive anybody. Everybody knows that the effect of this vote will mean that we will not amend the Constitution this year. That doesn't mean we have to wait 10 years, by the way, to change the Constitution. We can do something legislative. So a lot of questions about what happens next. What happens next? This amendment passes, the constitutional amendment fails. What are we left with? We are left with an opportunity to legislate. And the question that Levine asked, who do you trust to legislate? Do we really trust the party that actually is bringing this to a vote? The party that's letting people be heard? This is a different General Assembly, Madam Speaker. This is a General Assembly where we let these bills out. We let people have their chance to vote the right way. I hope we all vote the right way. I hope we didn't make a huge mistake. I hope that we vote the right way on this. Delegate Mieres, again, talked about how we have a broken system. We have an opportunity to fix that system. The broken system was that system that got you called into the Speaker's office when you got out of line and told you couldn't have an opportunity to vote, you couldn't do it. We've got the right system here. We've got the right General Assembly. You can trust that we will do this right. We've got criteria that require us to do it right. The bills that we passed earlier this session, Madam Speaker, members of the House, we can vote yes, send a signal to the governor and others and to the people about what redistricting should look like. We can do it legislatively in 2021. We can keep our promise to our voters to do this in a fair way, draw fair maps. We can fix the Constitution the year after that to make sure it goes that way forever and ever and ever. Speaker, members of the House, I ask you to vote yes on the substitute.
The delegate from Richmond City, Delegate McQuinn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I call for the pending question.
All those in favor of Delegate McQuinn's motion to move the pending question shall say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the pending question is called. Shall the floor substitute be agreed to? All those in favor of the floor substitute. Shall the floor substitute be agreed to? Aye. Those opposed? No. That's where I was going originally. Shall the floor substitute be agreed to on the electronic voting board?
Seriously? Really?
Tyler's voted. It's not working.
The clerk shall close the roll.
Ayes 47, nays 53, abstentions 0.
Ayes 47, nays 53, abstentions 0. The floor substitute is rejected. The delegate from the House will be at ease. The delegate from Newport News, Delegate Price.
Madam Speaker, is there a motion on the floor?
There is not a motion
permission
on the floor.
to the resolution?
Delegate Price, you have the floor.
Thank you. Members, for this vote right now,
Madam Speaker, point of order.
Delegate from Caroline, Delegate Auroch.
Madam Speaker, am I not correct that in order to have debate on a motion on a matter pending, we have to have a motion for its consideration? That we had an amendment proposed, and therefore we had discussion, but in order to have discussion now on the resolution, we need to have a motion for some form of action to debate the matter.
Madam Speaker,
Motion. Delegate from Chesapeake, Delegate Lefwich.
I move that we adopt SJ 18.
The delegate from Newport News, Delegate Price.
Madam Speaker, speaking to the motion.
Delegate Price, you have the floor.
Thank you. Members, the vote that we have before us is our having to weigh the words of the Senate Joint Resolution 18. And much like the other delegate asked, we can close our eyes and just think about just these words. Because at this moment, we are not voting on the enabling legislation that could make it better. We are voting on just the words before you, not the promises of change to come, because those are not guaranteed and actually are near impossible. Madam Speaker, a lot of money has been spent in getting the yes votes that may show up on this resolution. Shiny flyers and a lot of talking points. The lobbyists have even included personal attacks, falsehoods, and misinformation. They've sold this amendment based on using the enabling legislation as the crutch, but as we saw today, if there is a shift in the balance of power, all bets are off with the enabling legislation. What the lobbyists haven't done is explain away the fatal flaws of the amendment, and I simply have to question why. Why acknowledge the flaws and then still pressure members to support it? What they also haven't explained, Madam Speaker, is why they are doing the heavy lifting for Republicans. It's because of the amount of time and resources that have been invested. And that, quite frankly, is not my problem. My concern, however, is the amount of myths being perpetuated in their conversations in order to deliver, as my colleague said, something. One myth is that people have been working very hard for years on this amendment. And if we vote no, we would be throwing that all away. That's simply not true. As we have heard today, what we have in front of us was a conference report in the General Assembly last year. It is a Democratic idea turned into word gymnastics as to align with the lines in the sand that last year's leadership had drawn. This amendment isn't even what the advocates want. It's what's been sold as the only real reform, and that's just not true. Also, as we've heard today, another myth says that the voting rights protections are enshrined in the amendment. But no, Madam Speaker, they are cross-referenced. The VRA is simply pointed to in this amendment, but Madam Speaker and members, there's no secret that it is under attack. And evidenced by our need for House Bill 761, carried by Delegate Van Valkenburg, the Voting Rights Act is only as strong as the future United States Supreme Court justices let it be or that Congress reenacts it to be. Just like other issues, Madam Speaker, we are facing where states have to step up and do the right thing and protect its residents. The Senate agreed, actually, because during the committee meeting for the pre-clearance bill, they discussed the peril that awaits the Voting Rights Act in coming years. If the Voting Rights Act gets further watered down, guess what we will be left with Senate Joint Resolution 18, the 14th Amendment, Madam Speaker. Y'all, might I remind you that the 14th Amendment was fully intact during the Jim Crow era. This situation is what I would call not enshrined in the language of the amendment. Some are saying that structural racism doesn't exist anymore. They point to President Barack Obama. They point to the number of Black Caucus members that we have this time. But I would offer that it is because of the Voting Rights Act that we have been able to make such great progress. So then again, I say that the state level needs to step up, and that's those of us right here in this room. Madam Speaker, I want to be very clear that the Bethune-Hill decision did not create Black districts. The decision removed the intentional and deemed unconstitutional obstacles that were placed to prevent more Black electeds from coming to this body. And as other civil rights movement items, some of you are only here because of that decision. When you protect against the disenfranchisement of African American communities, you protect all voters. What we had in the substitute was 22 lines of text that could have better protected us than just a mention. That is what I would have called enshrined. Spell it out, don't just cross-reference. Golden Bethune-Hill herself has commented on how healthcare needs of people across the Commonwealth have been impacted by diminishing the voices of Black leaders who can speak to the concerns based on lived experiences. So she stated how important it is to have an independent process. And to those who would so disingenuously say that we can just fix it later, we heard from Delegate Scott that we still have federally deemed unconstitutional language in our state constitution, so I don't buy that. But what I do know is that I should not expect the fundraising, the hiring of lawyers, the town halls all across the Commonwealth, the talking points with guest speakers and shiny flyers in order to just come back to get that voting rights language. It's not the same, and it's virtually impossible. Another myth is that Senate Joint Resolution ends gerrymandering. But the truth is, looking at this amendment, there are no redistricting criteria that would accomplish the end of gerrymandering. In the substitute, there were 8. 8 criteria that directly dealt with political and racial gerrymandering. Another myth, Madam Speaker, is that it's independent. It takes drawing maps out of the hands of legislators, and I don't even know how that's legal to say. There are 8 whole legislators on this commission. And in addition to having 8 legislators, Senate Joint Resolution 18 gives 2 members of either the Senate or the House the power to thwart the process. We need independent redistricting reform, not guaranteeing 8 seats at the map drawing table for legislators into the future. Another myth is that the commission is nonpartisan. No, it's bipartisan. As we've heard, no room for independence. And I would say it's actually hyper-partisan for those 2 members of any party that can kill the process. Then there's the point that the Senate Joint Resolution 18 prevents mid-decade gerrymandering. Well, Madam Speaker, our Constitution already does that. And here's another one. There's lots of public input. The amendment only requires 3 public meetings for the entire state. Madam Speaker, we would need 3 just for Hampton Roads. The timing of which, dependent upon the census data, is that legislators would have to run to these hearings while they're in session. Another myth is that there will be guaranteed diversity on the commission. And this morning, Madam Speaker, I watched the Senate, and it was a really interesting conversation. The fears about the amendment not having diversity on the commission were supposedly put aside because we have black senators that can ensure the commission is diverse. But however, Madam Speaker, if you read the amendment, the only part that the current leadership plays a part in is choosing the selection committee. Once they are chosen, there are no words that mandate diversity for the commission. But even if our fears were assuaged for 2021, I do not have the luxury of being short-sighted. I must also think about when considering a constitutional amendment, 2031, 2041, 2051, 2061, and so on. This isn't about any of us as individuals. This is about how future processes will work. And further, the senator raised the point that the role of one black senator also pointed to the enabling legislation to back up. What he didn't say is that the enabling legislation probably won't even make it to 2031. What a difference a year makes, Madam Speaker, because we do have powerful black leaders this year, but last year we didn't. Last year we didn't even have diverse voices on the conference committee under Republican leadership. When we aren't at the table, who shall speak for us? There was, however, diversity at the table when we took a weak piece of enabling legislation and made it strong. That is the demonstrated factor that diverse voices lead to better products. Our request is not for quotas. Our request is simply for the commission to have to reflect the demographics of the Commonwealth. The last myth, Madam Speaker, has been debunked as well. This is the only year that we can do this until 2030. We have already voted on reform, and it is headed to the governor's desk. And we can do more, but we've got to do it right. The further issues that you've heard are actually probably the most important, because this would impact whether you're white, black, Asian, Republican, Democrat. And that is the timeline issue, Madam Speaker. There are significant problems with the timeline in the language of the amendment that could call into question the integrity of our ability to hold our elections without cutting into early voting, the time for our overseas friends to be able to vote, or maybe we should just have a short primary season for incumbent protection, Madam Speaker. But that's not what we fought so hard for the integrity and the pieces of legislation for our bills that we put through. We have had our private discussions on how bad the amendment is and that it doesn't need to be in our Constitution. And I am publicly stating for you now all of the flaws. We do not have to do this in this way. And I would submit if you vote yes, you are consciously choosing to vote yes despite all of the flaws that have been outlined, despite the pleas from your colleagues to help put actual needed protections into your Constitution, and despite the diverse voices in your districts that they need you to stand with them too. And as I close, Madam Speaker, the emails have been asking us to vote yes, but they were based on these myths. My job as a leader is to go back home and debunk them, and that's what I've done. I have to base it on the actual words of the amendment that were debunked in part by the actual patron of this resolution and by several members who have spoken on the floor. But no matter how many times you say a myth, it doesn't make it true. We can't operate on myths, we must operate on facts. So you may want to vote for this in order to help restore trust in our system. But I would say that the trust you're asking the people to have is in two people who already demonstrated that they don't want to play by rules. Let's instead ask the public to watch our every step. Watch our every step as we work toward a better amendment. We have everyone on both sides saying that they want something. Let's give it to them. Madam Speaker, the fact is we need a resolution that actually addresses the concerns that spurred the cries for redistricting reform from the beginning. We've already passed the legislation that would end gerrymandering. We have the ability to do a legislative fix for a commission for 2021 and choose that 2021, together with those pieces, could be the most transparent, independent, and fair redistricting process that we have had that will not allow gerrymandering. That is what the people have asked for. And if you vote no today, we can still deliver on that promise. So I urge you to vote no on Senate Joint Resolution 18. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The delegate from Enrico, Delegate Van Valkenburg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Delegate Van Valkenburg, you have the floor.
Madam Speaker, members of the body, I don't think it's been confusing on where I stand on this. I carried all the legislation. I've carried the amendment from the beginning. And I believed in this from the beginning. And so I'm going to kind of start. I'm not going to say much. I'm not going to try to combat all the arguments. We'd be here for 30 minutes. I don't think I'd change anybody's mind. And we got a lot to do. But I want to start kind of from where I'm coming from, and I want to give that perspective. Because you hear a lot about constituent emails, you hear a lot about lobbyists, you hear a lot about this group and that group. And as I think many of you know in my background and where I come from and what I do, right? I think most of you would say that the reason why I carry this stuff is that I'm an idealistic civics teacher. And I would plead guilty to that. I would. And what I would say is that over the last 20 so years of my life, I have spent my entire professional career studying, teaching, discussing, revising what I believe is true about democracy and what makes our democracy healthy. And that is where I come at this from. And that is why I've carried what I've carried, and that's why I've made the arguments that I've made, whether it's been in public or it's been in private meetings. And you know, as a sidebar, I never planned on being here. I don't come from a political family. I'm a teacher in the suburbs, right? I don't have any political connections. What made me come here, what made me to think to come here were two things. One was the election in 2016. Going into my classroom every day and having to explain to my students how a candidate, sorry other side, but how a candidate was trampling on our Constitution, trampling on its norms, and trampling on political discourse. And it's only gotten worse since. And I blame not all of it, but a lot of it on the gerrymandering that we have seen in Congress that has facilitated an awful political climate. But that's not why I ran. I ran because of the gerrymandering that was happening here, where we had a supermajority that was holding back progress on Medicaid expansion, on anti-discrimination bills, on the minimum wage, and they could do so because of the lines they drew. And so that's why I came here, and that's why I fight the fight I fight. And when I look back on this year, the things that I am most proud of and the things that I think that we did that are the most important things are things like House Bill 1, Delegate Herring's bill for early voting. It's things like Delegate Cole's bill for the opt-out voter registration bill. It's things like preclearance. And I fit redistricting form within that because I think that all gets to the health of our democracy. Now, my colleagues have already heard this, but you know, when some of your best friends in this place, as many of you know, it is my best friends and it is my allies, my closest confidants who are against this bill the most adamantly. And I respect the hell out of them. And I respect their arguments. And I think they respect mine too. And so when that happens, and when I have another side of the aisle that spent $1 million lying and calling me a socialist for 3 months, who are my biggest advocates, one second guesses one's thoughts. One second guesses one's priorities. One looks back. And so I have scoured this amendment. I have scoured this enabling legislation. I have talked to everybody I could possibly talk to, whether it's in this body, the other body, whether it's professionals, whether it's constituents, you name it, who it is, to make sure I'm doing the right thing, to make sure I'm doing what I think is the right thing. And that's why I have landed where I have landed. And you know, I'll conclude with one thing, and I will go after one argument. One argument that's been made about this is that even advocates say that it isn't perfect. And then that gets weaponized into, well, it must be bad. But there's a difference between it's not perfect and it's bad. If it's bad, you should vote no. If you think it's bad, you should vote no. You're not going to get any second guessing from me, right? But I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's perfect. L'État is not, c'est moi. I am not the state. I do not get to dictate policy for the Commonwealth of Virginia. There are some things I would have chosen to be in there that are not in there and vice versa. But I do think it's a good product. I do think it moves us forward. And that is why I will be voting yes for this. And I thought that those remarks should be on the record. So thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members of the body.
Delegate from Norfolk, Delegate Jones.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking of the amendment.
Delegate Jones, you have the floor.
Madam Speaker, members of the House, I was not going to say anything today because I felt like I said everything that I needed to earlier this week. But I have sat here and listened to these arguments down in our caucus room and on Twitter and here on the floor. And as I walked these halls these last couple of days, I thought about what brings me here. And that is, like Delegate Scott said, a calling and a commitment to service. But every time I am here, I am reminded about what my presence means in this building itself. This building and this Commonwealth and this democracy and this nation were built on the backs of people who look like me. And there were plenty of people who have served in this body and the one down the hall who were rolling over in their graves that people who look like me are sitting here today making the decisions for this state every year. But what most fascinates me and most enthralls me every time I step onto this floor, it really takes my breath away, is that this is the birthplace and cradle of democracy. And that, I think, is something that we talk about all the time here in Virginia. We are so proud of our role in this nation and how we got here. But when I look at this amendment, I see nothing democratic about it. I see nothing that pursues the perfection of the ideals that this state and this country were founded upon. And Delegate Scott's right, and a lot of other folks are right too. We deliberate on this stuff for a reason. We chew on it over and over and over again to make sure that we are getting it right. And I'm standing before you guys again to tell you that this is not the best that we can do. And we, as stewards of this democracy in this state and this Commonwealth, have an obligation to make sure that we are seeking perfection. And each time we don't, we do ourselves a disservice, and we do those who come behind us a disservice too. So I said we have to let perfect be the enemy of the good in this case, and I will say it again, but if you have any ounce of respect and any ounce of value for democracy, you will vote against this amendment. This is the wrong path. Please, please vote no against this amendment.
A delegate from Campbell, Delegate Ferris.
Madam Speaker.
Delegate Ferris.
I move the pending question.
There's a motion from Delegate Ferris to move the pending question. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Pending question is not called. No. Delegate from Norfolk, Delegate Lindsay.
Madam Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Delegate Lindsay, you have the floor.
I'm not so naive as to believe that my words will change the mind of anyone who is here ready to cast their vote. I understand and appreciate that we all get here by different paths, and we all process things in different ways. And we associate our choices with our values, our philosophies, many times our religion, and the way we're reared. And I understand and appreciate that a lot of times the devil is in the details. And when I look at this particular bill, what I think has been masterful about the way it has been portrayed is it has been categorized as nonpartisan redistricting. In point of fact, it is anything but. It is a situation where we're seeking to enshrine in the Constitution that 2 people out of 8 who are appointed to this process, whether they're Republican, whether they're Democrat, can affect a situation where this matter will automatically have to go to the Supreme Court. Now, I know that there are those of us who have a great deal of confidence in the Supreme Court, most of whom are not lawyers, and so they assume that the Supreme Court is the ultimate venue where justice is discharged. While I don't take issue with the ideal, I also understand that the Supreme Courts are not gods. The justices of the Supreme Court are not gods. They're individuals. They also, like us, come from backgrounds, come from philosophies, come from training, beliefs, the like. One of my favorite sayings from a movie I once watched was that the greatest thing the devil ever accomplished was convincing man that he did not exist. Well, the greatest challenge, and I'm going to just change that around a little bit because I'm not very imaginative. One of the greatest challenges that has been overcome with this bill is the bill of goods that's being sold is in telling folk that this bill solves the issue of partisanship in politics, and it solves the issue of making sure that the electorate affects their leaders as opposed to their leaders affecting the choice of the electorate. I can tell you this bill does not accomplish that. This bill is going to create a situation for years and eons to come where factions of politicians are going to continue to be political, all in the name of democracy, while at the same time being able to engage in the protection of self-interest. This is a bill where you have where 2 people can affect the overall will of 6 others. I just can't think of many situations where that is the default position. This is a bill that is going to leave the backdrop as the Supreme Court. And one thing I'll say is that I have lived with this bill, this legislature, this session, and the whole ideal of nonpartisan redistricting has been more a part of my life than I would ever hope it to be. I am probably going to be as happy as anyone here when the votes are cast today. But I'm not disillusioned in believing that that resolves the issue. That just means that that's the start of the fight to come. Because this bill, if it passes, does not satisfy what we claim and profess we're up to. What it does is gives us the opportunity to hide behind a process and claim we did our jobs. And in such, this bill is lacking. Thank you.
The delegate from Manassas, Delegate Carter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking to the resolution.
Delegate Carter, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One of the hardest things to understand is your own biases. We all come with them. They're built into our minds. We can work to be better the next day than we were the last. But it's work. And one of the biases that I constantly work on is trying to hear the words that come from black thoughts. Hear the words that are spoken in black voices. And I am going to stand up here now and attempt to use my white voice to air the words of black thoughts. There's a few quotes that I'd like to share with the body. Number one, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. Delegate Price has spoken quite often about the way that this has been covered in the press, about the way that the newspapers have talked about this. And those words have been hard to hear for a lot of us, sometimes including me. But she has spoken about how the newspaper is covering this as a need to do something. But this is a way by which oppression can manifest itself in our redistricting. Madam Speaker, I have heard Delegate Price's words. Another quote, the most disrespected person in America is the black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the black woman. The most neglected person in America is the black woman. Madam Speaker, I hear the voices of the women in the Black Caucus who are telling me that this is not the way to protect the rights of minorities to have their voices heard in our Commonwealth. I hear that. And now I'm standing here repeating that, hoping that some of my friends in this body can hear those words in my white man's voice when they could not hear them in the voice of a black woman. And Madam Speaker, the third quote that I'd like to share with the body, and these were all from Malcolm X. The third quote that I would like to share with the body. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6, there's no progress. If you pull it out all the way, that's not progress. Progress is healing the wound that the blow made. And they haven't even pulled the knife out, much less healed the wound. They won't admit the knife is there. Madam Speaker, I'm standing here admitting that last year I helped put that knife in the back of my colleagues in the Black Caucus. And I am standing here hoping that the members of this body will help me try to heal that wound. Don't just pull the knife out 6 inches. Don't just pull the knife out and walk away. Madam Speaker, we've got to pull that knife out, and we have got to heal the wound. I hope that we will reject this resolution. Thank you.
The delegate from Richmond City, Delegate Bourne.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, speaking to the measure.
Delegate Bourne, you have the floor.
Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I, like all of us, have heard the profound and poetic, the powerful opposition that has come from many of the people that I serve with in the Black Caucus. And as we have considered this measure, this issue, we've heard about all the flaws, all the problems, all the shortcomings with SJ 18. And so as the session has gone on, I've said to myself, how did we get here? All of my colleagues are generally reasonable people. They're smart, they're good. They had to be because they got here. We just don't get to the General Assembly by happenstance. And as I began to think how we got here, a word, a very instructive word